Today's passage is from the book of Genesis, chapter 12, verses 1 through 4. Genesis 12, 1 through 4. The Lord had said to Abram, "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse. And all peoples of earth will be blessed through you." So Abram left, as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. I want to begin today with another edition of Brian's Bad Jokes. Here we go. There were once 3 turtles named Bob, John, and Joe, and they decided to go on a picnic. Now, the picnic grounds were 10 miles away, and a turtle can only travel about 1 mile a day, so it would take him 10 days to get there. But they packed the picnic and they set off, and they traveled the 10 days to the picnic grounds. But when they got there, and they unloaded their basket, they realized they had forgotten a bottle opener, and they needed one. So John and Bob said to Joe, "Joe, you go back home, get the bottle opener, and bring it to us." And Joe said, "No way. I'll be gone 20 days. 10 days there, 10 days back. You'll eat all the food while I'm gone." Bob and John said, "No, we promise, Joe, we will not eat any of the food. We won't touch any of it. We will wait for you." Finally, Joe relented, headed back home. Well, 10 days passed, 20 days passed. They were ready for Joe to return, but they didn't see him. Still, promise is a promise, so the other turtles didn't eat any of the food. Another 20 days passed. Still no sign of Joe. But promise is a promise. Bob and John did not eat any of the food. Another 20 days passed. At this point, it seemed clear something had happened to Joe. He wasn't coming back. And Bob and John realized if they didn't eat pretty soon, they were going to starve to death. So finally, weak with hunger, they went to the basket, they got the food, and just as they reached it up to take a bite, Joe jumped out from behind a rock and said, "I told you you'd eat the food, I'm not going." I tell you this joke because it involves a long journey and a promise. And today's passage is really about a long journey and a promise. I want to begin with the long journey. Today we're introduced to Abram. We know him better by the name God will give him later, Abraham, but God hasn't given him that name yet, so I'm going to honestly try to remember to call him Abram in this sermon. And I'll mention that Abram is the first person in Genesis who we can place in history. I can't give you the exact dates of his life, but we know he was born around 2100 BC. And we're told that God called Abram at the age of 75, so most of the events we know from his life happened about 2,000 years before Jesus. And for Abram, his journey with God began with a call. God called Abram and said, "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land that I will show you." There's 2 parts to that call. The first part of that call is leave. God began his call to Abram by saying, "Leave everything that is comfortable. Leave your home. Leave your friends. Leave any family members that won't go with you. Leave everything that you have ever known that is safe and comfortable." I think a lot of times that is God's call for us today. Leave what is comfortable. Sometimes following God is easy. I mean, it is. There are things that God calls us to do that I think we would probably do anyway. God calls us to be honest, to be trustworthy people. And I think most people tend to be trustworthy. We know that if we act in a trustworthy manner, we're going to be trusted. So I think most people are trustworthy most of the time. That's not that hard for us. But there are other areas where following God is more difficult, where God calls us to leave what is comfortable. Because often there's a part of us that says, I'm just not comfortable going downtown to serve in a homeless shelter. Or there's a part of us that says, when someone has done something that is really wrong, I'm just not comfortable fully forgiving them to restore that relationship. Something you've heard me talk about several times over the last few months is to choose one. Choose one person you know that you care about that does not know the Lord. And pray for that person. Pray every day for them. Some days it may be a lengthy prayer where you bring this person before God. Other days it may just be a few seconds where you mention their name. But pray every day for this person. I'm going to take a guess right now. Here it is. If you have done that, if this is a person who you interact with in life and you have committed and prayed for that person every day, my guess is that God right now has been calling you to do something you're not comfortable with. Maybe not for everybody, but I think for most people. If you have committed and actually prayed for this person every day, my guess is that God has been calling you to do something for this person that is outside of your comfort zone. God calls us to leave comfort behind. So it begins with a call to leave behind what is comfortable. But then there's a second part on Abram's call. God said, go to the land that I will show you. This is my cell phone. Pretty basic. A lot of you know I fought getting a cell phone for a very long time. I do not like them for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons I don't like them is I think they make us dumber. And I think this has happened to me. I am now a dumber person than I was before I had this. Tell you how. I used to be able to get around. I could go places. If I had an address, I could look at a map and I could find where I wanted to go. If I went somewhere, even one time, there was like a 90% chance I could find my way back there. 80%. 75 at worst. Now, some part of my brain has realized that if I click one little button and say the address out loud, this little magic box is going to get me there. I think I'm dumber because of it. I no longer have to learn directions. I say this because Abram didn't have a cell phone. He didn't have a little box telling him what way to go. And God did not give him a lot of directions. God did not say, I'm taking you to a land of milk and honey. He didn't say, you're going to go to the land of Canaan, so pack up. God basically said to Abram, go that way. God called Abram to trust him, to go where God was leading him. God called Abram to have faith. I think that's still God's call in our lives today, to follow God in faith. That God seems to work on a need-to-know basis. God calls us for what he needs us to know right now. He calls us to trust him for the future, to follow him today and trust he has a plan. We've all heard the old saying, do your best and leave the rest to God. And that's a bit of a cliche, but there's some truth there. Because God is calling us to do what is best right now. God is calling us to trust him today and to follow where he leads and trust that he has a plan for the future. Here's the crazy part about God's call. Sometimes he calls us to things that he knows won't work. He calls us to take on projects that will fail. He calls us to apply for jobs we won't get or apply to schools we won't get into. He calls us to make proposals that will be rejected. He calls us to enter relationships that aren't going to last. That doesn't mean they were a mistake. God calls us to trust him today. We need to remember that Abraham never inherited the land himself. It would go to his descendants. But for Abram, following God itself was an act of faith. It was trusting God had a plan for the future. In our lives today, the journey itself is often the act of faith. God calls us to trust him today, to go where he will lead and trust that he really does have a long-term plan. And the journey itself is the act of faith. Well, Abram had faith. He followed the Lord. He left what was comfortable behind to go to a place he did not know. In response, God made a promise to Abram. And this was a big promise. This was more than a promise. God made a covenant with Abram. I know we don't use the word covenant a lot anymore. I think most people imagine that a covenant is sort of like a contract, which is sort of accurate. But covenant is a contract on steroids. It's more than just a contract. A contract is an agreement where two people both agree to do something. I say I'll do something if you do something else. Give you an example. I learned of a promotion recently that I think is just the funniest thing I've heard of. The fast food restaurant, Burger King, right now is selling the Whopper for 1 penny. It's a 1-cent hamburger. Here's the catch. You have to order the hamburger over the phone, and you have to do it using a McDonald's Wi-Fi. I think that's hilarious. You have to go into the competitor's store to buy the hamburger. That's ingenious. It's also a contract. They're saying if I will go to their competitor to order a hamburger, they'll give me that hamburger for 1 penny. If I don't do that, if I won't go to their competitor's Wi-Fi, then I don't get the hamburger for that price. I have to live up to my end of the agreement before they will. That's a contract. A covenant is an agreement where both parties say they are going to follow through no matter what. A covenant is where both sides say, I am going to do this even if the other person doesn't follow through. There aren't many covenants in our world today. I think probably marriage and perhaps parenthood are the only covenants we have left. But God made a covenant with Abram. He made a promise that he said he would follow through with no matter what. Really, in this passage we learn 3 promises God made. And these are big promises. Really, the rest of the Bible, and I suppose in a sense the rest of human history, is working out how God fulfilled these promises. And these are promises God still makes to us today. First, God promised Abram a home. God promised Abram land. He promised that Abram would go to this land, it would be his. And this is something we've already kind of hinted at. God called Abram to leave everything he knew to go to a new land. And that would be his home. The land of Canaan, or modern day Israel. And God promised this land to Abram. And still today, God promises us a home. It's not a patch of land in the Middle East, but it's a greater home. Occasionally we sing the hymn, "This world is not our home." And we sing that because no place in this world can ever really be home. God has prepared an eternal home for us. And he has promised that as our home. Everywhere else we're just visiting. So God promised Abram a home. Second, God promised Abram a family. He promised that Abram would have great family, immense number of descendants. That's why God later changed Abram's name. Abram means the father of elevation. God changed his name to Abraham, which means the father of multitudes, or the father of nations. God said that Abraham had so many descendants that trying to count them would be like counting the stars in the skies or the individual grains of sand on the beach. And we see this promise fulfilled. The rest of the Old Testament tells how Abram's family grew. And in the New Testament, Paul tells us that Abram's family went beyond just the Israelites. He tells us that everyone who puts their faith in God is a child of Abram. And so now we have become part of Abram's family. And this is still promise God makes to us. He promises us a family. As the Gospel of John says, it's not a family based on blood. That we are not children by human will or a husband's decision, but children born of God. Now we have been invited into the family of God. And we have become a family because there is one Father who is over all of us. So God promised a family. Third and finally, God promised Abram a blessing. And this is probably the biggest one of these. God promised a blessing. He promised Abram that he would bless Abram. He promised that anyone who blessed Abram, anyone who recognized the good work that God was doing in Abram's life, would be blessed. Anyone who cursed Abram would be cursed. And most important, God promised that the entire world will be blessed through Abram. The Hebrew is a little complicated here, but the sense it gives is that this promise is going to take a while. That eventually, through Abram, the entire world would be blessed. And now we see that promise fulfilled. Because the blessing has come in Jesus Christ. The blessing has come in the one who has died for the world. There's a reason we celebrate this season. It's the reason we put up decorations. It's the reason we exchange presents. It's the reason we gather together with our family. We celebrate because the blessing has come. Christ has come into our world. And because Christ has come into our world, sin is defeated. Because Christ has come into our world, death is just a temporary separation. Because Christ has come into our world, we are blessed. We have a reason to have hope and to rejoice. God put a call on Abram's life. A call to leave what is comfortable and to follow the Lord in faith. And when Abram did that, God gave him a promise. A promise of a family, a promise of a home, and most of all, a promise of a blessing. A blessing that would be beyond his family, but a blessing for the entire world. That now anyone who turns to God, from any country, any race, any social background, any economic situation, anyone who will turn to him in repentance can be forgiven of any sin. So now we rejoice because we have this blessing as well. In a moment, we're going to stand for the invitation hymn. And as we stand to sing, if you need that blessing, if you need that home in God, if you need his family, if you need the blessing of Christ, the redemption he offers, you have an opportunity. As you'll stand with me now for invitation hymn, which is Silent Night, and we'll sing all the verses.